The first sign that something was off with Evelyn came when she voluntarily offered to help me clean out the garage. Now, to the average passerby, that might sound like the kind of wholesome Saturday chore couples do together while sipping lemonade and listening to 70s rock. But not in our house. Evelyn considered the garage to be a remote, dangerous outpost full of cobwebs and unpaired socks. The fact that she strolled in there with a hair tie, sneakers, and a let's do this attitude was my first clue that the world was either ending or had spun entirely off its axis. I watched her from behind a stack of old lawn chairs I'd been promising to throw out since Obama was in office. She had on her casual but still better than your best day outfit, not a hair out of place, and a small smile that looked about 30% too forced. Evelyn was the type of woman who alphabetized our spice rack and genuinely thought linen spray was a life necessity. She had opinions on curtain pleats and seasonal candle rotations, but she had never once voluntarily touched anything with rust on it. And yet, there she was, tossing old extension cords into a pile, like some kind of suburban Indiana Lara Croft. "I just think we should clear the space out," she said over her shoulder, not even flinching when a dust cloud poofed in her face. "Maybe make room for a project table." A project table. Evelyn hadn't done a project since she attempted to crochet a blanket for Karen's baby shower and gave up halfway through, leaving a trapezoid-shaped pile of yarn that now lives in our linen closet like a silent witness to creative ambition gone wrong. I nodded like this was all very normal, but in my head, I was doing the kind of math you only do when something smells like it's on fire and nobody else is reacting. Still, I played along. I'm Ethan, by the way, 39, own a small graphic design business downtown, married to Evelyn for 6 years. Stepdad to Karen, who treats me like a tax deduction, and possessor of a fairly predictable routine that involves black coffee, polite conversations with the neighbors, and arguing with our microwave because it refuses to stop beeping once food is done. So I let Evelyn direct the garage refresh, like a woman possessed. We hauled things out, reorganized, dusted shelves, and when she stepped out to grab more totes, I sat down on the wooden bench I built last spring and tried to figure out what the hell was going on. That's when I saw it. An envelope. Not a regular bill or coupon packet. It was one of those fancy, thick paper kind of envelopes, slightly wedged behind a box labeled Thanksgiving Lights, not Christmas. The handwriting on the front was familiar, but not Evelyn's. Her handwriting had perfect loops and a slant that said, "I take my time with grocery lists." This one was messy, casual. It read, "For E." I stared at it for a long moment. Doing that thing you do when you pretend you're going to leave something alone, but have already decided to snoop the second your conscience looks away. And sure enough, I opened it. Now, I expected maybe a sentimental note, something old, something forgotten. What I found was 6 handwritten pages, folded neatly and topped with a Polaroid, an actual Polaroid, like we were suddenly living in 1992. In the photo, Evelyn sat at a small table across from a man I didn't recognize. He was leaning toward her, mid-laugh, and she was looking at him the way she usually looks at artisan cheese samples, like they were the answer to all of life's problems. No timestamp, no context, just 2 people at what looked like a garden party or something out of a home design catalog. Linen napkins, little tea lights, definitely not our house, and definitely not our circle of friends. One of those elegant but forced setups where everything smells like lavender and self-congratulation. Now, the letter wasn't addressed to me. It was written by Evelyn. Or at least, it had her name signed at the bottom. But the tone wasn't her usual clipped efficiency. It was emotional, nostalgic, and it contained far too many adjectives. Evelyn doesn't feel deeply on paper. She bullet points. This letter, it waxed poetic. About him. I sat there and read the whole thing, front to back, while the sound of her SUV tires crunched in the driveway. And because I am, above all things, spectacular at pretending I haven't just had the emotional carpet yanked out from under me, I folded the letter back up, slipped it into the envelope, and tucked it into my hoodie pocket like it was just a receipt from Lowe's. We ate Chinese takeout that night and watched a documentary about bird migration while Evelyn nodded along and offered commentary like, "They fly so far, it's kind of romantic, isn't it?" Which was just a cruel coincidence, I'm sure. I didn't say a word. Instead, I waited. I went on with the next few days like a man watching the weather report before a tornado, smiling politely while boarding up the windows. Then came the key detail, the part that would have been laugh-out-loud funny if it weren't the setup for the biggest plot twist of my life. We got a dinner invitation. From Karen. Now, Karen only invites us to dinner for 3 reasons. She's pregnant, she's mad at Evelyn and needs backup, or she's selling something. But this time, it was none of those. This time, it was just a casual get-together, her words. Her very suspicious words. I agreed without hesitation. Evelyn hesitated, just for a beat too long. Sure, she said, that'll be nice. We arrived at Karen's condo on Friday night. The kind of place with bar stools nobody sits on and a couch that looks expensive and uncomfortable. We brought a bottle of wine, like good guests, and she poured us glasses while making vague small talk about work and city traffic. Then, she smiled at me. Real big. Karen never smiles at me unless she wants something or knows something. And then, she said the line that flipped the whole table. So you met Roman? I blinked. Who? Roman. She looked directly at Evelyn. You have told him, right? Silence. The kind you can slice with a butter knife. Evelyn looked like someone had just asked her to name all the U.S. presidents in reverse order. I don't think we've talked about that yet. About what? I asked, already 87% certain I knew. Karen sipped her wine and casually threw the bomb like it was a softball at the company picnic. Roman, your garden party buddy. Mom's little side project. Now, there are many reactions a man can have when his stepdaughter casually refers to a side project, like it's a new deck installation. I went with raised eyebrows and a sip of wine so long it bordered on performance art. I said. Roman. Evelyn stared at her daughter like she had just announced plans to become a mime. Karen, on the other hand, looked quite pleased with herself, like a magician mid-reveal. I thought he was your yoga teacher or something, I said, turning to Evelyn with the kind of smile that you only perfect after years of customer service phone calls and marital compromise. He was, Evelyn said, trying to find the parachute that was no longer attached to the plane. Oh, cool, I replied. You two just got real close over Downward Dog, huh? Karen choked on her drink. To Evelyn's credit, she didn't run, scream, or deny it. She just blinked slowly, like someone rebooting. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. Karen had done the job for me. Bless her petty, chaotic little heart. That was the night everything truly changed. Not because I found out, but because I realized I'd already known, deep down, for weeks. Maybe months. And knowing is one thing. Hearing it confirmed by your passive-aggressive stepdaughter over risotto is another. I finished my wine, complimented the cooking, and told Karen we should do this more often. Because nothing says, I know your secrets, quite like perfect manners and a tight-lipped smile. I spent the morning after the Roman reveal, doing what any sensible husband would do when he finds out he's been unknowingly cast in the supporting role of his own marriage, laundry. Nothing quite balances existential dread like folding a fitted sheet, especially when you're terrible at it. I gave up after the 3rd attempt, rolled it into a glorified pillowcase, and called it artistic expression. Evelyn was unusually chipper that day. I assume because now that the cat was out of the bag, she no longer had to fake confusion whenever Karen accidentally mentioned someone named Roman. Her version of damage control involved humming while unloading the dishwasher and complimenting my choice of socks, which felt about as subtle as a marching band at a funeral. She was clearly waiting for me to bring it up again. But I wasn't going to. Not yet. I had something better in mind. You see, Roman wasn't just a name now. He was a research project. And unlike Evelyn, I didn't do yoga or juice cleanses. I had internet access and a petty streak big enough to rival Midwestern property lines. I started with Karen. Not directly, of course. That would have required admitting I was emotionally compromised, which I wasn't. I was curious. The way one might be curious about how many paper towels it would take to absorb an entire gallon of milk. Hypothetical. Educational. Completely detached. So I scrolled through Karen's social media like I was looking for a stolen identity. 3 minutes in, I struck gold. A group photo from some rooftop gathering that was aggressively captioned with things like, good vibes only, and my people Blackheart. Karen was in the middle, posing like she invented sunsets. And there, on her left, tall, smug, wearing a shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest he'd seen a YouTube video on confidence, was Roman. I clicked on his profile. And let me tell you, Roman was a man who had never lost a staring contest with a mirror. He ran a small business, of course. Holistic Self-Actualization Coaching, which is the kind of job title that means absolutely nothing and yet still sounds expensive. His page was full of motivational quotes written in cursive over stock photos of beaches and staircases. My personal favorite was, "Don't chase, attract. You are the energy." The energy of what? He didn't say. But I'm assuming it's somewhere between a scented candle and a free trial. Now, here's where things took a delightful turn. Roman had a YouTube channel. Yes, really. The thumbnails were a parade of deep squints and inspirational hand gestures. I clicked on a video titled Aligning Masculine Intent with Divine Purpose, which sounded like it might be a TED Talk, but turned out to be 15 minutes of him talking about how sitting cross-legged on the floor had changed his life. I wasn't just annoyed. I was offended that this was the man Evelyn had emotionally invested in. Not because he was better than me, but because he was worse in a very specific, very intentional way. He was the kind of man who referred to his apartment as a space and called his couch a meditation altar. But I digress. By dinner, I had an entire PowerPoint presentation's worth of information on Roman, including his podcast appearances, which featured him saying things like, "Monogamy is a social fiction, and authenticity begins when we abandon the illusion of ownership over another person's journey." Evelyn had fallen for a man who talked like a self-help horoscope. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I invited our friends Ben and Lydia over for game night. Now, Ben and Lydia have been married for 11 years and have mastered the fine art of passive-aggressive affection. They argue over IKEA furniture assembly and then kiss in front of the refrigerator like it's a contractual obligation. They're also the kind of people who bring their own coasters to other people's houses. Evelyn didn't suspect a thing when I set out the board games and offered to let her pick first. She chose a card game where the goal was to describe someone using traits and let the group guess. Karen's living room still had that artificial lemon scent, like someone sprayed cleaning product right before we walked in to trick us into thinking their lives were together. But the real show wasn't the decor. It was the way Evelyn froze when her daughter said Roman's name out loud. I could see the calculation flash across her face. Deny, minimize, or pivot. She chose none. She just stood there, blinking like someone rebooting mid-software update. Roman, a man I hadn't known existed 20 minutes ago, was suddenly the unofficial headliner of my marriage. Karen, blissfully unaware of the grenade she'd casually tossed into the room, grabbed another soda and flopped onto the couch like she hadn't just lit the fuse on an emotional bomb. "So, Roman," I said, turning back to Evelyn, who still hadn't managed a syllable. "Is he part of your new book club, or does he specialize in midlife detours?" She opened her mouth, probably to produce a vague sentence packed with emotional disclaimers and half-baked metaphors about connection. Nothing came out, just a dry blink and a head tilt like she was trying to align her aura to face the exit. Karen looked up. "Wait, you seriously didn't tell him about Roman?" This was becoming a family performance, except nobody had rehearsed the script and half the cast didn't know they were on stage. I turned to Karen, who now looked confused instead of smug. "Tell me what?" "That Evelyn's been consulting a freelance philosopher with romantic side benefits." Karen shrugged. "Well, yeah, I figured it was obvious." "Obvious?" I said. "You thought it was obvious?" "What part was obvious? The part where your mother became aggressively interested in the wellness section of Target, or the fact she stopped answering basic questions like where she went on Thursdays?" Karen looked uncomfortable, which was rich coming from the girl who just publicly detonated her mother's secret life because she lacks the gene for timing. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Okay, Ethan, we should talk. Privately." No, this is fine," I said, gesturing around the room. "Let's keep it public. That way, no one has to wonder if I imagined it all." Her eyes narrowed just a little, enough to confirm she hadn't planned for any of this, which made it more enjoyable. "I didn't want it to come out this way," she said. "Then you probably shouldn't have brought it in at all." Karen got up and muttered something about going to check on her roommate's dog, which might have been code for, "I don't want to be in the splash zone." Once she was gone, Evelyn finally sat down. Not next to me, but across from me, like we were in a parent-teacher conference, and she was about to explain why our kid was failing math. "I've been seeing Roman for a while," she said. "Clearly, I didn't want to hurt you." "Oh, well, that part's going great." She exhaled sharply, which I assumed was supposed to read as emotional struggle, but came off more like indigestion. "Ethan, things haven't been right between us for a long time. You mean since the marriage got in the way of your extracurricular workshops? I needed to explore. Don't say growth. Don't say journey. Pick a word that doesn't sound like it belongs on an essential oils label. She looked down at her hands like she expected wisdom to be printed on her palms. I didn't mean to lie, she said finally. No, you just meant to edit reality in your favor. Big difference. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Not the meaningful kind. More like the kind you experience when you accidentally sit next to someone who forgot deodorant and you're trying to decide whether to move. I should have said something sooner, she mumbled. You didn't. So now you get the full awkward consequences, delivered in a living room with your daughter 2 doors away Googling how to emotionally distance from both parents. She gave a bitter little laugh. You always do this. You turn everything into some ironic commentary. Only when the material writes itself. I stood up. She looked surprised, like she thought I'd stay there and hold hands while we shared our emotional truths like a mutual therapy retreat. You done? I asked. I didn't mean for this to be the end. It's not, I said. It's just the start of me not playing along anymore. And with that, I left her sitting in her daughter's overpriced accent chair, staring at nothing in particular. Back in my car, I didn't blast music or sit dramatically in the driveway staring at the garage like they do in movies. I just started the engine and drove home. Evelyn got back an hour later. She didn't say a word, just hung her coat and went upstairs. I stayed downstairs, watched a documentary about space junk, and deleted her birthday reminder from my calendar. Roman. What a name. It didn't hurt. Not the way people expect. It felt like finding out someone had been slowly repainting the walls of your house in beige while you were out of town. Annoying. Tacky. But reversible. I wasn't devastated. I was reprogramming. And Evelyn had no idea the software update had already begun. 2 days after Roman's debut in our household narrative, Evelyn asked if I wanted to go to a local community theater production. That was suspicious, since Evelyn typically considered amateur acting just slightly less painful than dental surgery without anesthetic. She'd once described community plays as middle-aged people yelling at each other in fake British accents under weak lighting. So when she walked into the kitchen holding a brightly colored pamphlet with the words Seasonal Reflections, a dramatic retelling of the calendar printed across the top, I blinked at her like she'd suggested we spend the weekend knitting vests for traffic cones. She smiled and waved the pamphlet like she was inviting me to the ballet. It's supposed to be immersive. Immersive. Another word ruined by marketing. I nodded and said, great. Nothing says Saturday night like interpretive July. We arrived at the town hall promptly at 6:30, where they'd rearranged folding chairs into a circle so intimate I could have trimmed the arm hair of the man sitting across from me. He was either part of the cast or just very enthusiastic about linen pants. Evelyn took her seat with the sort of excitement I usually only saw during clearance sales. I sat beside her, calculating how long I'd have to wait before feigning an urgent text from Ben about a hypothetical plumbing emergency. The play began with a woman wrapped in a scarf announcing, "I am January, bearer of reflection and frost." And it only got more existential from there. March was played by a guy in mismatched socks who kept referring to himself as the season of hope and unpaid taxes. I stopped trying to understand the plot somewhere between April's monologue about being emotionally reborn and July's inexplicable drum solo. Evelyn was enthralled. She leaned forward, nodding like each vague metaphor about seasonal change was unlocking some ancient truth. At one point, she even reached for my hand, which I found deeply confusing. This was the most enthusiasm she'd shown for anything I'd done with her in a month, and it involved a guy pretending to be September arguing with a papier-mâché pumpkin. It got worse. At the end of the play, they opened the floor for questions. No one moved at first, probably out of confusion, but then Evelyn raised her hand. I braced myself. She stood up, complimented the actors, sincerely, which was the biggest red flag so far, and then asked if Roman would be returning to the ensemble next season. There it was. In a room full of folding chairs and seasonal metaphors, she'd just offered me the final puzzle piece. Roman wasn't just her self-help hobby or her spiritual confidant. He was also Mr. October. The man in question emerged from behind a cardboard tree and gave a small, self-satisfied wave. He looked exactly like someone who would take himself seriously while dressed as a human embodiment of autumn. I stared at him, then at Evelyn, then back at him. He smiled directly at me, probably assuming I was just some passive husband who didn't know how to Google. Afterward, Evelyn insisted on sticking around for the cast mingle, which, for the uninitiated, is what happens when amateur actors force you to praise them while standing next to a makeshift cheese table. Roman made his way toward us like a man about to pitch a startup no one asked for. "Ethan," he said, extending a hand. "So good to finally meet you." Finally, as if we were star-crossed characters in a slow-moving sitcom. "Roman," I said, shaking his hand with the grip of someone who'd spent the last 72 hours compiling a list of his online pseudonyms. "Really enjoyed your portrayal of mid-autumn malaise." He grinned. "It's a role I connect with deeply." "I could tell," I replied. "You seemed very emotionally invested in the concept of daylight savings." Evelyn let out a little laugh that sounded too practiced. Roman looked like he wanted to say something meaningful, but instead offered, "Art is about truth." I nodded. "Is that why you're dating my wife?" He blinked. Evelyn dropped her plastic cup of punch. A woman behind us said, "Oh dear," in the tone of someone watching a soap opera develop live. Roman adjusted his scarf. "That's complicated." "It's actually not," I said. "But you do seem like the kind of guy who'd call forgetting your anniversary a journey into self-alignment." Evelyn stepped in like she'd just remembered she was part of this scenario. "Ethan, can we talk?" "We're talking," I said. "Well, more accurately, I'm talking, and you're realizing the local arts council was not the safest hiding place." Roman looked vaguely insulted. "This doesn't feel like the right time or space for hostility." "Oh, I'm not hostile," I said. "I'm entertained. I came here expecting community theater. Instead, I found out October's been doing nightly rehearsals at my house." He turned a shade of pale that clashed nicely with his mustard cardigan. Evelyn, to her credit, didn't deny it. She didn't say a word, just stood there, blinking like she was trying to reboot her personality. We left early. On the drive home, she finally broke the silence with, "So you've known?" "No, I just guessed based on your sudden interest in local culture and seasonal metaphors," I replied. "Next you'll tell me you joined a pottery class." "I didn't mean for it to get complicated," she said, because apparently that was the only sentence left in her vocabulary. "You mean you didn't plan for me to notice?" Which, frankly, is insulting. You're cheating with a man who wears fingerless gloves and quotes himself in his Instagram captions. I noticed things. She said nothing. When we got home, she went straight upstairs. I sat in the living room, turned on the TV, and watched a rerun of a game show where people guessed the price of a toaster. It felt oddly soothing. The thing is, I didn't feel devastated. Not yet. I felt tired, but also weirdly satisfied. It's not every day you catch your wife cheating via community theater. And despite everything, I had plans now. Not the kind that involve shouting or melodrama. Something more productive. Because when your marriage starts unraveling in front of Mr. October and a cardboard calendar, the next move has to be strategic. And mine was already in motion. It started with a shared Google Calendar. Not because I'm a control freak or a spreadsheet enthusiast, but because Evelyn insisted on coordinating domestic flow after reading half a productivity blog. So there it was, our week neatly color-coded. Dentist appointments in gray. Karen's community college classes in blue. Evelyn's inexplicably vague entries in pink. Movement session, vision journaling, Roman call, tentative. That one had been deleted by the time I checked, but Google leaves traces. Digital breadcrumbs for the attentive and mildly irritated. I didn't confront her. That would imply I expected something useful from the conversation. Instead, I started editing the calendar back. Not with passive-aggressive digs, but with real plans. Specific ones. Subtle, strategic, annoyingly efficient ones. First, I moved up the mortgage auto-pay by a few days. Then I shifted her car's service appointment to the same time as one of her movement sessions. Then I did something most husbands don't do unless under duress. I contacted my mother-in-law. Gloria, Evelyn's mom, has the social energy of a game show contestant and the attention span of a YouTube ad. She's harmless but exhausting, which made her perfect. I called her under the guise of concern. Something about Evelyn seeming off and needing grounding energy. Gloria loved that phrasing. She scheduled a weekend visit faster than I could pretend to be grateful. When I told Evelyn, she paused for 2 full seconds before smiling like she was trying not to scream. "That's sweet," she said. "She misses you," I replied. "She wants to do puzzles and talk about your childhood." Evelyn looked like she was reevaluating her life choices in real time. By Friday, Gloria had arrived with 3 tote bags of organic tea and enough energy to light a small village. Evelyn tried to act gracious, but I could see the quiet panic in her eyes as her mother rearranged our living room furniture because the tea was trapped behind the bookshelf. Now, while Evelyn was trapped in nightly conversations about gluten and unresolved teenage drama, I went to work. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for data. Cold, precise, administratively satisfying data. Roman's business had a publicly listed address. It was a co-op workspace downtown, sandwiched between a pet bakery and a place that sold handmade soap with motivational slogans etched into them. I booked a consultation under a fake name, Derek Langford. I picked Derek because it sounds just bland enough to be forgettable, but has the kind of quiet authority you'd expect from someone who wears loafers by choice. The intake form asked questions like, what limits your vibrational growth? And where do you see your soul in 5 years? I wrote, traffic, and somewhere with better parking. When I walked into Roman's office, which, to be clear, was a rented corner with 2 beanbags and a salt lamp, I nearly lost it. There was a framed print that read, your body is a guest house. Let every tenant teach you something. The guest house in question was, I assume, his own ego. He greeted me in the kind of outfit that suggested he got dressed by spinning a wheel labeled intention. Linen vest. Bracelets. No shoes. I shook his hand and introduced myself as Derek, self-employed, looking for soul recalibration. Roman nodded slowly like I'd just revealed a deep trauma. We sat. He asked what brought me in. I said I was feeling out of sync with the people closest to me, especially someone who'd shifted alliances. He hummed like he was absorbing the vibration of my pain. I asked what his method was. He said, intuitive excavation, which sounded like therapy if it had fewer ethics and more scented candles. 10 minutes in, I casually asked about group work, shared sessions, maybe partner growth. His face lit up. I'm actually guiding someone through that journey right now. A beautiful, open-hearted woman. We've done amazing energetic work. I nodded. Like this wasn't a man who ran barefoot workshops about unlearning responsibility. I wrapped up the session by scheduling a follow-up. I had no intention of attending. I'd already gotten what I came for. I walked out, resisting the urge to take one of his business cards, which were shaped like leaves. Back home, Gloria was trying to install a singing bowl app on our TV. Evelyn sat stiffly, watching the screen flash colors like she was bracing for a seizure. Later that night, while Evelyn showered and Gloria steeped something herbal in a pot that wasn't dishwasher safe, I sat at my desk and drafted an email. It was to Roman, from my real email this time. Subject line, a thoughtful exchange. In the body, I wrote, Roman, thanks for our recent session. I've had time to reflect and wanted to let you know that your current partner in vibrational expansion is also married to me. Consider this a friendly heads up from someone who's no longer interested in performing emotional CPR on an open-hearted woman who thinks boundaries are optional. Ethan. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. I just wanted the message in his inbox, waiting like a paper cut on a humid day. The next morning, Evelyn looked different. Less composed. A little quieter. I didn't bring it up. Instead, I rearranged the bookshelf Gloria had moved and asked if she wanted to help me resort the fiction section by author. Evelyn declined. Later that week, I visited a lawyer. Not because I was ready to file, but because I wanted options. I wanted to know what my exit would cost, what I could keep, and how to make sure it all unfolded exactly on my terms. The lawyer, a woman named Robin, had the demeanor of someone who didn't believe in small talk. I liked her immediately. She laid out the facts without sugar, foam, or unnecessary adjectives. I walked out with a folder and a mental checklist. Evelyn still hadn't mentioned Roman. Not once. No apology. No confession. Nothing. Which meant she was waiting for me to either explode or disappear. I planned to do neither. I had no interest in salvaging something that had turned into a group project without my consent. But I did want one final act. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just inconvenient. And I knew exactly how to start it. I started with the thermostat. Evelyn liked it at 72, claimed anything below that felt like sleeping in a refrigerator. So I programmed it to drop to 68 every night at 2 a.m., just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be traceable. She mentioned it twice in passing, once wrapped in a throw blanket and once while rummaging for socks, but never confronted me directly. Passive discomfort, my new preferred love language. Then I moved on to the car. We share one of those smart hybrids with an app that lets you control everything short of steering it with your mind. I synced it to my phone. Every morning at 6 a.m., it chirped to life and flashed its headlights in the driveway for exactly 1 minute. It was just long enough to wake her up. I denied knowing anything about it. She repaired it twice. I reconnected it each time from my office during lunch. These weren't revenge moves. They were gestures. A gentle reminder that things had changed and that I could be inconvenient, too, just with more subtlety and technical literacy. While Evelyn dealt with those minor ghosts in the machine, I was quietly packing. Not cardboard boxes in the hallway packing. Not suspicious. Just one drawer at a time. A couple books here, some tools there, half my socks, my backup charger, the extension cord she always claimed ruined the aesthetic of the office, into a duffel bag in the trunk of my car. It felt like prepping for a weekend trip, but with legal ramifications. I also returned to the lawyer, Robin, who now greeted me with a dry, "Back for more cheerful planning?" She had a folder already started for me. Inside was a draft agreement, itemized like a grocery list of consequences. I flipped through it like I was reading the world's least romantic prenup, then made a few notes in the margins. Not demands, just conditions. Back at home, Evelyn had started hosting creative workshops in the sunroom. That meant folding chairs, vague playlists, and at least one woman named Deandra who wore scarves as tops. I wasn't invited. I made sure to walk through exactly once per meeting holding a power drill and a bag of screws, just long enough to interrupt whatever was being manifest. By now, Evelyn had stopped pretending. We still shared a house and occasionally the couch, but otherwise operated like co-workers who no longer had shared projects. She wasn't angry, just awkward, like she couldn't figure out if I was unaware or just unimpressed. I gave her no clues. I watered the plants, answered work emails, and listened to her tell Gloria over speakerphone that she was finally rediscovering her voice. Gloria responded with something about moon phases and releasing inner tension. I resisted the urge to yell, "Check the calendar. She's been practicing with Roman since equinox." Then came the final catalyst. Roman posted a video on his business page titled, "Clearing the Path for Authentic Connection." This sounded like another one of his self-directed TED Talks, but at the 2-minute mark, Evelyn appeared in the background. Not a full appearance, just enough of a profile, a laugh, a hair tuck. It was unmistakably her. The caption read, "Filmed after an amazing session with a dear companion on her journey." I didn't comment. I didn't save the video. I printed a still frame, black and white, grainy, from my office printer. I left it on the kitchen counter under the TV remote with a post-it. Might want to ask your journey to be more discreet. She didn't bring it up. Instead, she started putting her phone face down more often. She used to do that early in our relationship, when she was still pretending Roman didn't exist. I marked it as the return of an old habit, like seasonal allergies or performative vulnerability. Then, I picked my day. It was a Monday, intentionally boring. Evelyn was in the garage rearranging paint cans, suddenly invested in energy-clearing projects. I walked in with a stack of papers in a manila envelope and set them on the hood of the car. She turned. "What's that?" "An update." She picked it up, opened it, flipped through without sitting down. The divorce packet was clean, labeled, sorted. No drama, no scribbled accusations. Just paperwork, my notes, and a letter explaining what I wanted, which wasn't much. The house, she could keep. I just wanted the truck, my office setup, and to split the savings evenly. The pension wasn't even mentioned. I knew what she'd say if it was. She closed the folder. "So this is it." "That depends. You can sign now, or we can pretend to attend counseling until I develop a twitch." "I thought you weren't going to do anything." "Yeah, that was the last surprise I had planned." She blinked. "You're serious. Let's not pretend that surprises us." She sat down on the small bench next to the wall of half-empty stained cans. "You're just ending it." "No, Evelyn. You ended it. I'm just following through. Like you follow through with aromatherapy and emotional journaling." She stayed quiet, probably for the first time all week. "I didn't want this," she said finally. "You didn't want to be married. You wanted emotional networking with snacks." Her jaw moved like she was about to argue, but then she closed it again. A smart choice. I left her there in the garage, walked inside, made a few calls, scheduled a moving truck for Saturday. I emailed Robin to let her know it was officially go time. The rest of the week was quiet. Evelyn didn't bring up the envelope again. She went to her workshops. I finished a work project. We passed each other like neighbors who recognized each other from somewhere, but didn't remember where. On Saturday, I left with 3 boxes, a duffel bag, and my office chair, which I had always said was the most loyal thing in the house. Evelyn stood in the doorway. "You're really leaving?" "Yes. That's what the moving truck and legally binding documents usually indicate." She hesitated. I thought maybe. "I know." She looked at the boxes. "You didn't take everything. Neither did you, when you left emotionally." She nodded slowly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say." "Don't worry," I said. "That's nothing new." And then I left. No door slam. No dramatic last look. Just one man, an office chair, and a list of things he wouldn't miss. Living alone again came with perks. Not profound, soul-searching ones. More like being able to control the TV remote and never having to hear the phrase, "energy cleanse" again. My new place was a rental above a closed-down dental office. It had all the charm of a waiting room, but it was clean, quiet, and no one hosted group meditations in the living room. I didn't miss Evelyn. I missed my screwdriver set, which she accidentally packed, and the way I didn't have to explain to anyone why I was reorganizing my bookshelf in alphabetical order while listening to early 2000s playlists. But Evelyn, specifically? No. Her absence was like background noise suddenly turning off. Uncomfortable for a minute. Then peaceful. Then you wonder how you ever got anything done with that racket in your ear all the time. 2 weeks after I moved out, she called. I didn't answer. Not out of pettiness, but because I was in the middle of setting up my home office, and nothing ruins the mood like picking up a call from your legally estranged wellness enthusiast. She left a voicemail. "Hey, just wondering if we could talk sometime." Nothing dramatic. Just a conversation. A conversation. Because that was something we excelled at. Just like we excelled at ignoring warning signs, sharing surface-level smiles, and pretending that group therapy disguised as spiritual growth was a valid reason to emotionally check out of a marriage. I gave it 3 days. Then I texted back. "If this is about the standing mixer, I already replaced it." She responded within minutes. "Not about the mixer. I just need to say something. One time. Then I'll go." I agreed. Not because I wanted closure, but because I was curious about what kind of revised script she'd written for herself. People don't change their endings. They just learn to say them with more confident pauses. We met at the library. Neutral territory. No history. No couches soaked in passive-aggressive energy. No framed photos of fake happy moments. Just fluorescent lights and a strict no-talking policy, which I assumed would help keep things from veering into performance territory. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner with a notebook and a pen she probably selected for its intentional ink flow. I sat across from her and said nothing. Let her make the first move. "I've been doing a lot of reflecting," she began, which I mentally translated as, "I've been reverse engineering a version of events that makes me look human." "I bet," I said. She looked at me like I'd already ruined the rhythm she rehearsed in her car. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she continued. "Not for, the specific things, but for how I handled everything." I nodded slowly. "So, a general-purpose apology. Good for all seasons." She sighed. "You were always like this. You make everything sound like a punchline." "Not everything. Just the stuff that begs for it." Evelyn shifted in her seat. I wasn't happy. For a long time. I didn't know how to say it without making everything worse. And instead, "You made it what?" "Enlightening." "I didn't plan any of it. Roman just happened." "You say that like he's a flat tire." She blinked. "You really don't want to hear anything I have to say." "Oh, I'm here, aren't I? I'm listening. Just not buying." She tapped her pen against the notebook. I glanced at it. It wasn't a letter. It was a list, titled Things That Went Wrong. Under it, bullet points like communication, expectation drift, and my favorite, spiritual mismatching. "You made a list," I said. "I needed to organize my thoughts. You needed to justify them." "That's not fair." "You know what wasn't fair? Living with a partner who considered every disagreement a lesson in emotional resistance." She stared down at the notebook. "I miss how things were before we stopped trying." I looked at her like she'd just suggested we start a band. "You stopped trying. I just stopped pretending you hadn't." There was silence. Real silence. Not the kind filled with unspoken accusations or the sound of Roman's playlist floating from the sunroom. Finally, She looked up. So what now? Now? You go to your moon baths, or whatever. I live in a place where nobody alphabetizes the condiments. I'm serious. So am I. She closed the notebook. You're not going to give me anything, are you? I gave you years. I gave you patience and space and the benefit of every doubt. What more do you want, Evelyn? A certificate? No. I just wanted to know if you ever really loved me. If you have to ask that, the answer won't help you. That shut her up for a good 10 seconds. She stood, adjusted the strap of her expensive-looking tote, and looked down at me like she wanted to say something profound. Instead, she nodded. Okay. She walked away without flair. No last look, no teary eye, no lingering scent of regret. Just footsteps, fading, and then gone. I sat there a few minutes longer, not because I was emotional, but because the chair was surprisingly comfortable and I hadn't finished judging her handwriting. Then I got up, walked out, and went home. My home, where the temperature stayed at 68, the car didn't honk on its own, and the only voice I heard was my own. And that was that. No redemption arc. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two people who weren't compatible, pretending for years that shared chores equaled shared values. We weren't some tragic love story. We were a case study in quiet disappointment. And now, at least, the experiment was over. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel